Hi, everybody. Good morning to you. Happy Thursday. I know that we have tens of thousands of people in our city who have suffered through a night without power in a situation that is very reminiscent, unfortunately, of what happened in 2021, 2 years ago this month. As a matter of fact, Mayor Kirk Watson is going to be joining us. He has joined us. Let me just see here. I want to invite him. So let's see. If you'll just bear with me here, I'm trying to get the mayor. There he is. Joining us to give us an update on everything that has gone on, but also where we're going from here. And then, of course, I know the amount of frustration and anger and disappointment has intensified, as well as people are sitting in their homes, dark and cold. Mr. Mayor, good morning to you. Thank you for taking the time to join us. Just emphasizing the seriousness of the situation that we find ourselves in as a city. I do think there's still a level of not maybe full understanding among some people about the difference between what's happening now and what happened 2 years ago. Can you just, in the best way possible, make that distinction so that people are fully aware that this situation that we're dealing with right now is largely a local issue that is very different from February 2021.
Yeah, it is, but I think it's important as I start that in a discussion of the technical. I think it's important, as you were just saying, to recognize that the trauma is still there. It really, although, and I'll talk about the technical difference then and now, and this incident. Wow, we all have memories of that event. This happens the way it does. I think it exacerbates our sense of fear and how long is it going to take, and frankly, our level of frustration on things like this. But with that being said, the Uri was a situation where we had a problem with the statewide grid in producing energy. And one of the things that happened was ERCOT, which is the state regulator of our energy grid in the state of Texas. Texas is its own universe, you know, by comparison to other states. But ERCOT manages. ERCOT had said that in order to manage the overall grid, that Austin Energy needed to shed power. That power ended up going elsewhere. In fact, what happened was that there were people without power before that shedding, but Austin Energy had been able to restore all of that power before it had to send energy elsewhere.
But the bottom line is that was largely an issue of the state power grid.
That's
this
right.
is an issue of trees falling in our city, right?
Primarily what this is an issue of is that you had a lot of precipitation that's lasted over a long period of time at just the temperature necessary to keep it frozen. That gets on those trees and accumulates on those trees, makes them heavy, they fall. And in addition to that, we have an issue with our power lines. Power lines, it's an interesting thing. We have not only power lines that have their own weight, and then you add the weight of ice, but they also have communications equipment that are tied to them, which adds additional weight and makes for the ability for them to fall as well.
Mr. Mayor, I want to ask you just kind of point blank here. I know it is fair to say that you have been the mayor of our city for what, 4 weeks now? Maybe you're starting your 5th week.
Tomorrow will be the 4th week.
It's also fair that you have led through a number of different types of crises before.
Yes.
I just want to ask you, was the city of Austin prepared for what we are going through right now as a city?
Well, I'll answer that in kind of 3 parts. First, I think that Austin Energy was probably ready for what they anticipated was going to happen and what weather reports stated. But that doesn't mean they were necessarily ready for the long accumulation. In fact, they probably were not. And so that's one of the reasons you saw the mutual agreements put into place and called up when they hadn't been called up at the very beginning, things of that nature. The third thing I'd say is I believe that we need at the city of Austin, like you say, I've only been at it a month, but one of the things that I'm going to ask for is that we change the way we communicate with our residents and our customers of Austin Energy, because I'm not sure, in my view, let me just say it that way. In my view, I don't believe that the city was ready about how it was going to communicate with people, especially as you saw what happened here. You might be restoring power to say 50, 100, 125,000 people, but at the same time, you were losing power to that same, roughly that same number. How do you communicate so that people know what's going on better than I think happened in this case?
Well, frankly, the lack of communication is striking. I mean, if you go back and read the after action report from the historic February 2021 freeze, it was communication, communication, communication. And yet, I think that is contributing to such an intense level of frustration among people today, is that until today, there was not sort of a cohesive voice from our local government. Can you just speak to that?
Yes. Well, in fact, I spoke to it this morning at the press conference. I became very frustrated, and I'll just say it out loud. I became very frustrated about the lack of communication that I felt like we were having. And I think it's also very important for things like this to happen, including in a press conference where reporters and members of the media are able to ask questions so that you get answers to specific questions and not just a press release. And my level of frustration on that was, I think in these kinds of situations, we have to overly communicate. By the way, if you can overly communicate.
Right, sure.
But get as much information out there as you can, and not just on what's happening with power, but people are smart, and they're going to have questions about a whole variety of things. And unless you have availability, you lose the opportunity to answer those questions.
So certainly this morning marked the first cohesive news conference. Do you know if there was discussion about doing that ahead of this event? I mean, certainly there were forecasts for a winter weather event, for a significant, potentially historic winter weather event. Do you think that should have happened ahead of the storm? And since it didn't potentially, why didn't it? Can you speak to that?
Yes, I think it should have happened, and I think on a routine basis, and things that I've said this morning is that when we get past the health and safety issues and get people's power restored, one of the things that we need to do is we need to look at how it is to provide communication in the future, because we're going to have other incidents. We're kidding ourselves if we think we can solve all of these issues, and we're going to have more incidents. We're seeing that with weather more frequently. So we need to have a better communication plan that starts very early. And if things shift, what we discover is, oh, this is going to last longer than predicted. Oh, we're going to get more precipitation than what was originally predicted. We need to be already communicating so that we can pivot on that and provide people with information. Yes, it needed to happen early. And candidly, I put here recently, and that's why we had it this morning.
But at the same time, Mayor, I do just want to emphasize that so much of what happened was predicted. It wasn't as though this just came out of nowhere. I mean, it truly was predicted.
Let me be clear. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, if things change where something is not fully predicted, you need to be ready to do that. But I'm not saying that at all. In fact, what I am saying is expectations should have been set, and the way they are best set is by having opportunities for people to ask questions.
couple of specific things that I know you all are talking about and spoke to at the news conference this morning, and that is the degree to which Austin Energy did or did not have crews in place as the storm developed and moved our way, what was in place before, but also the backup systems that were or were not in place. Austin has, what, 85 electrical repair crews, and I know that we're also drafting, if you will, or relying upon other entities to provide power assistance for repairs.
Right. So we have mutual aid agreements, and one of the things that people may already know, but let's talk about it a second, is that if the governor doesn't declare a disaster where you get certain types of aid, Austin Energy, which is a publicly owned utility, a municipally owned utility, it has what are called mutual aid agreements with other publicly municipally owned utilities and co-ops, so that you're able to help each other. In fact, I've been on the phone this morning with a mayor of one of those other cities talking about what could happen in terms of, now they're having to take care of some of their business.
Sure. Yeah.
And being able to help us in Austin. Though a couple of things about that. One is the experts were looking at when they need to use mutual aid agreements and people in. We look back in some could argue accurately that maybe we should have done that earlier. Not maybe, that could have been done earlier to get ahead of some of these things. And so we wouldn't be so much in a situation, as has been said, of steps forward and 3 steps backward. And that's one of the things that when we have people's power restored and people are safe, we have the cleanup. We have to sit down and debrief on this and ask what ought to be the decision tree that gets that done more quickly.
Certainly, there has been a lot of conversation within the past 24, 48 hours as well. Can you just speak to burying power lines? And I know you all are talking about this, but there is a lot of public interest in this point. Burying power lines versus not burying power lines.
Yeah, so a couple of things about that. One is that certainly as we go forward with new developments, new subdivisions, that sort of thing, a serious look ought to be at doing that on the front end so that you're not having to retrofit old neighborhoods the way much of the service area, because in the South and in Texas, while you some places that have more recently been burying lines, the way it was done before was that you put the line up in the air the way they are. On the retrofit, and I think this is a discussion that ought to occur because I think the public ought to be in on this discussion. You go through events like this and you have a heightened sensitivity. But what we ought to do is we ought to ask the questions about how do you, on balance, do we want to look at things like retrofitting and putting things? A couple of things sometimes get lost in that discussion, particularly when we're in a situation like we're in right now, where it's let's fix it and this is the fix. It's sometimes easier than it is. First of all, to bury them in retrofitting, you're going to have to be digging of street, maybe yards. To get the wires, where you need them to go, not only those that provide the electricity on our block, but also to the houses. You're going to be tearing up alleyways and that sort of thing. And the cost of it is going to be pretty significant. In addition to that, you're going to have situations where if power goes out while it's buried, or you're going to have, in some instances, greater difficulty identifying where that occurred and being able to fix it. My point is this. It's the kind of thing that we need to do the pros and cons and ask the question, everything from expense to reliability, and ask that question, especially coming out of something like this when we all have a heightened sensitivity and we want to know the answers.
And it sounds like you were saying that you plan to lead on that issue in
Yeah.
the coming weeks and months.
Yes, let me be clear about that. One is, if we don't take the opportunity to learn from this, then we're making a huge mistake. As you pointed out, it's been 20 years since I've been in the mayor's office, and I've been on it now for 4 weeks. And this instance is something we should learn from. We also have, by the way, a committee of the city council that is chaired by Councilmember Leslie Poole, that is an Austin Energy Advisory Committee, but it's a committee of the whole. And she was here this morning here at the Emergency Operations Center. We've talked, and I anticipate to see us do that probably through that committee that she chairs.
I want to also talk about a very specific kind of hyper-local issue too that has come up. I know you're talking about it in other venues as well, and that is tree trimming and Austin's approach to tree trimming, and whether or not it is effective, and whether or not there need to be significant changes to the city's program.
Yeah, and again, that's one of those things that ought to be on the list, right? And as we go forward, Austin loves its trees, and so do I. We all do. We have an enviable urban tree canopy that the rest of the country looks at and says, "Wow, that's something special." But we do this balancing of what we want, so that we avoid certain situations like what we're in right now. We probably need to look at the policy about what we do with tree trimming. I will tell you that many times over the past many years, even while I was in the Texas Senate, not in the mayor's office, I would hear from people when Austin Energy would come in and say, "We want to trim so that these won't fall on power lines." And it becomes a give and take and a discussion. We need to have that discussion. In addition to that, and I need to go back and educate myself on this, that one of the things that we do in terms of our policy is we require, so if you have a line, we require that the trees be trimmed in kind of a Y fashion, and then things grow. And the problem with that, of course, is that when you do it that way, I'm told, it weakens the tree.
Yes.
Then you have an event like this and you have a weaker tree, and what will happen, it will fall on the lines. So we need, again, you're right. That is a specific thing to Austin, and we need to learn from this experience.
I want to go back, if you can, and Will, just on the transparency issue as well, and the communication issue. I noticed this morning, and maybe it was not in the frame of what I was seeing. I was not personally at the news conference, but was that translated? Was that news conference translated in Spanish and for the hearing impaired, for example?
Yes, it was. In fact, last night we were here. That was a major point of discussion in terms of making sure that would happen. We had closed captioning so that people be able to see the closed captioning, and it was simulcast in a way where we had the translation.
Is it fair to say, though, that you think the city and Austin Energy specifically did underestimate the severity of this storm, though?
Looking back in hindsight and where we are right now, you would have to say we an underestimation of how long it was going to last and the amount of and in hindsight, I think that's probably one of the things you would expect. But I want to be clear. By the National Weather Service information, they've pointed out a couple of times that things have changed quickly. So before I jump to a conclusion, I've given you my answer, which I think needs to be looked at.
Yeah, thank you.
That is the kind of thing that we ought to look at. We ought to do a timeline and figure out if there were things that we could have done differently based upon information that we had. But in hindsight, obviously the storm has lasted longer. You've had more precipitation, and that's caused damage that I don't think was anticipated at the beginning.
Also, just with regard to some of the technological issues, again, I know that you all have spoken to that some, but there were some problems with the website that may have shown different, potentially inaccurate information. Maybe there were some reporting glitches that occurred. Can you just speak to that too? Because I
Well,
think people are a little confused about maybe what they saw and the accuracy of it.
a couple of things. One of the things that bothered me, and I'll admit that I didn't drill down into everything on that, but one of the things that bugged me was that I have enough explanation about why it is that you went, however many hours, 24 hours, but I'm making that up, but for a period of time where it looked like nothing was happening.
Mm-hmm.
You look at
right.
60,000 people being impacted, and you're being told that work is being done to restore. Right. In fact, it even says that there is a restoration of capacity. Point at the laptop I've got up right now, but yet it doesn't seem to be changing, and there's not a good explanation for that. So I think that's one of the things we need to go back to what I was saying about communications. I really think we need to analyze how we communicate those things. And then I've heard what you just said about some that people felt like were inaccurate. I need to drill down on that. I have not looked at that, but again, that is the kind of thing that unfortunately we need to revisit.
Mayor, going forward, I know in the next few days, as we try to come out of this situation, this crisis for many people, can you just speak to the timing for getting power fully restored for the 150,000 people who don't have power?
So I'm going to come at that from a couple of angles. One is Austin Energy was asked by ERCOT, I think it was, again, which is a state regulatory agency that deals with our power grid. The question was asked yesterday, when can you get power restored substantially to everyone? There may be some one-offs, particularly if it's something where the line to the house is what got knocked down, right, opposed to a more major line. Can that be done in 48 hours? And the answer from Austin was, yes, it can. Then what happens is you look at the clock, you back away from, you back up 48 hours. That puts you at Friday around 5 or 6 o'clock. So me listening to the experts on, I believe that the answer they gave to ERCOT, an accurate answer, and be in a situation where substantially we'll have power substantially restored throughout the service area by that on Friday. And my hope is that with what's going on outside right now, and by that I mean a thawing, it makes it
right. Yeah, I hear it outside my window. Yeah.
Good. What that does is it will make it easier for our crews to restore power. When they're dealing with some of the things they're dealing with that are frozen, that adds to the problem. So hopefully it'll be easier and we'll see a more rapid response than even that.
With regard to city services, someone asked this question, and I thought it was a very good one. I am sure hundreds and thousands of other people are going to have the same question, the same issue. For those of us who have lost huge branches in our yards, what is the best course of action, and to what degree will the city remove those big branches?
Well, the city is asking that you allow the city to remove those if they're in roadways. Because that's the safest way. And what we don't want, for example, is somebody for a tree limb to be tied up in a power line and people not really know it, or think that the power line is not live and do something that harms them or causes death. By the way, let me just say it over and over again. If you see a down power line, assume it is a live power line. The other thing is, icy branches that might be laying in the street are heavier than you may think they are. You may think you're awfully strong, but you may hurt yourself trying to move those. Call 311 and report that. When you call 311, they're going to prioritize this. They'll start with the more major roadways, and then they'll go to different corridors and then down neighborhood streets. But please call 311 if you want limbs or debris, vegetation that's in the roadways to be removed.
But then what about the remnants of these branches on private property? In other words, if a neighbor comes over and chops up the branch, then what happens next? What should a person do?
Yeah, and you're going to want to do that the way we do resource recovery anyway, where you're able to, and we'll have that, we'll make sure that that's posted, but you can batch them up and put them out and get it to the curb. And then we're setting up a storm debris request system so that you'll be able to put them at the curb or where you normally put your refuse waste, solid waste, and then we'll make sure that they can be picked up. We call it Austin Resource Recovery, and it's just like you currently do with your large brush collection.
Good information, Mayor. So just in closing, I just want to go back to this point, just in terms of the amount of community frustration. It seems as though you are acknowledging that you do not believe, as we sit here at 11 o'clock on Thursday morning, that the city's response was sufficient enough.
Yeah, well, look, that's why we had a press conference today, is because I feel pretty strongly that we needed to do a better job of communicating with the public. We also, as I said in the press today, I will be looking at how we go about doing a better job of communicating, because we will have other incidents where we need to communicate, and we need to start at the very beginning of that, and better than what has occurred this time. I share the frustration, and I had more access than the average person. So I share the frustration of being in the dark at my house because I was without power, and I share the frustration of feeling like I was in the dark when it came to information. So we have to acknowledge that, and we have to move forward in a positive way.
Mr. Mayor, we appreciate your time and help very, very much. I know you're very busy, but I think answering some of these questions, and to your point, having some of these discussions in a variety of ways where people can actually get information right now.
Right.
Some people aren't able to watch television, for example, but are juicing their phones in their cars. So we appreciate you taking the time to talk to us on this particular platform, and good luck getting your own power restored as well.
Well, we finally did. But we went a long day, just like everybody, and others are having longer days than I had. And we're doing everything we can to restore that power. And I appreciate you allowing me to talk about this and candidly address some of these issues, because it's important for our city and the people of our city. So thank you, Tony.
Mayor, thank you. All right, take care. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.